Hey guys, it's Too Tall Tom here, and today I'm going to talk to you about why I personally think that Blizzard should just get it over with and release a classic or BC server already, or even some classic server that's going to upgrade to BC eventually. So, with Legion coming out in the next, what is it, probably 8 months now? I think more than that. My math's pretty bad, but I think 8 months. Um, the game's really changed from what everyone fell in love with when they first started playing in vanilla. Now, I personally didn't have the experience of playing in vanilla. I started mid to late BC, and I think I just hit 70 by the time Wrath the Lich King was rolling around. And I mean, at the time I was playing, I think, a lot of Halo 3, so I was kind of split between World of Warcraft and my Xbox. But I remember that I really, really loved how the game played back then. Now, what I mean by that is it was a much more social experience. There was a lot of quests that you couldn't really do alone. So, you'd have to make a group and you'd meet new people on your server. Now, of course, you have Group Finder and pretty well all of the quests except for one that I kind of encountered in Icecrown Citadel, which was was fairly difficult, but it wasn't something I couldn't handle alone. But it could have helped having a group. But anyway, all of them are now just single player quests. Like even the Tanan jungle can be done alone, which I think is a major. It's taking something away from the game. Because for a long time, I guess I played as much as a World of Warcraft addict. So, I did put my hours in, but I was never really addicted to the gameplay itself. I was always addicted to the social experience that you could have while playing the game. Like, it was so easy to make lots of friends back in the previous expansions. And I think it ended ironically around Cataclysm when Raid Finder came out. I guess, Raid Finder from the eyes of Blizzard was a necessary addition now that, Dungeon Finder was a huge success. But I think the thing they don't understand is there's a fundamental difference between what a dungeon is and what a raid is. Dungeon Finder works for dungeons because it was nice having to find a group, but it kind of was a pain. And Dungeon Finder allowed you to get into those dungeons and, do them. So, it worked on that aspect, and it really helped with when I played a lot in Wrath of the Lich King, when, you'd have to gear up through heroics. And, at that point, maybe not everyone needed to do heroics. Maybe the least they needed to do was Naxxramas or Alduar, because pretty sure I started raiding around the time Trial of the Crusader came out. So I mean, sure I could do that heroic about once a day, but it also helped that they had the Valor and Justice point system back then. So you wanted to do your heroics just to get your points, but Dungeon Finder helped that, whereas Raid Finder, In the beginning, it was kind of a mess. People, the loot dropped like it used to, and everyone would have to roll against each other, and you would have people needing on stuff that they didn't need because their guildmate could use it and they could just trade it to them after, or whatnot. But at least that loot experience did promote some kind of social activity, because there was a lot of pieces of gear that I was able to get by, checking out the person's gear who won, and then asking them politely if they really needed the gear or if I could have it. And you'd be surprised that a lot of people did give up the gear, and they were like, here you go, I just kind of needed it because for some reason they just see the need option and they're like, you know what, who cares? I mean, it's Raid Finder. But that's where it comes to, is Raid Finder is really not needed. Raids are supposed to be that end game, you can only I wouldn't really say the best of the best, but the people who are willing to put in the time get to see the bosses. So I think Raid Finders is completely inappropriate for World of Warcraft because unlike dungeons where it's not endgame content, you can just find it with a group of random people and whatnot. Raids really, it's a horrible experience. Like, you go in, there's little to no talk unless someone's screwing up and everyone is bickering and bitching at each other, which, I had in yesterday's LFR. I actively try to avoid LFR unless, someone needs it. But it really, at this point, is just a toxic place unless you find that magical group. And then again, you're not with that magical group forever. You're with that magical group for maybe one of the queues. So, you can have one good queue, but, the next one may be just as toxic as the last. So I think at this point, they really just need to take it out, if they can. Or what I always thought would be a better alternative is make Raid Finder, since they already have pseudo gear, like a pseudo raid. You don't get to see the actual bosses that are in the raid. You get to see, maybe a scaled down version, like maybe just a very, very simplistic boss, but not the boss who would fight in the actual raid. Like, I think Raid Finder maybe, like a dragon boss where it's simplistic mechanics. The boss has to tank him away, the DPS have to stand at the sides or else they'll get tail swiped and whatnot, would be a better fit for Raid Finder. So then the casual players could have their own endgame content, and the hardcore raiders wouldn't have to get sick of the raids after, let me see, 4? Is it 4 levels of difficulty with Raid Finder, Normal, Heroic, and Mythic? Like, that was my personal experience when I was raiding a lot in Highmall, and my group was really good. We progressed through, I think, all the way up to Heroic Imperator, and we were getting some good solid attempts in, but we kind of wanted to do a little bit of Mythic, to get a little bit of the gear to help us out. Of course, at that time, we were one of the the first progressed guilds, so there wasn't really anyone who was geared enough to do Mythic with us, other than, the other raiding guilds, which at that point they probably had their, I think a lot of them were still gearing up as well, but there wasn't enough players to do Mythic. And the sad part is after doing so much Highmall and, Raid Finder coming out, so we're doing it on Raid Finder as well, we got so burnt out on raiding that when Blackrock Foundry came out, we were just like, we were done. We didn't want to raid anymore because it was like, okay, a new raid came out, we raided so much, and now all of our gear is virtually useless except for to gear us up for the next one, which I don't really have a problem with. My main problem was that I just didn't have any interest in Blackrock Foundry, which, nothing against the raid. I'm sure, you guys had a lot of fun with it, but to me it just seemed like Siege of Orgrimmar 2, and I really, really didn't like Siege of Orgrimmar. Well, I didn't like the parts in the caves. I loved the first half of Siege of Orgrimmar, but Blackrock Foundry was literally like if they took Siege of Orgrimmar and just had the cave parts. So I was like, yeah, I don't really have an interest in fighting more orcs. I wanted to change a pace. So, I ended up quitting for a majority of Blackrock Foundry and coming back for Hellfire Citadel, which it's okay. I haven't really been able to sink my teeth into it and make a group because, once again, no one's looking for a guild on my server, at least, because, I play on Moonguard, which there's a lot of different things about it, and I would say it's more of a casual server, and thus the casual players don't need to join a guild to see the content, so why would they want to join a guild? Especially since, from my experience with guilds, there's a lot of drama that goes on when there's someone who shouldn't be a guild leader as a guild leader. I've been kicked out of plenty of guilds in my time, and even just recently I was kicked out of one, and maybe I'll go into the story of that. in another video, but I digress. Um, so yeah, sorry this got a little bit rambling off topic, but I think the main thing is that WoW's gotten to a point in its life where it's a fundamentally different game than the game that everyone originally purchased back in, 2004, 2005, I guess in the 2000s in general. There's no more talent trees, there's no more enchanting for your gear to raid, no more gemming. Like, this character right now who's running Nexus right here, I've finally gotten her to 80, and I've started to twink her, and it's amazing in Wrath of the Lich King remembering all the stuff that you used to have to do to raid. Like, you have to enchant all the different pieces of gear, you gem everything with the proper gems, and I miss that. I miss when, to gear up, you would get the gear and then you would need the proper gems and enchants to boost your DPS to, be able to do the raids, and people would check that. Now it's like, oh, did you do Tanan, like, for maybe like 3 days? Okay, you're geared enough for normal Hellfire Citadel pretty well the entire thing. Which, really, at that point they're like, well, why should I? Because I've also been gearing through LFR and I've seen all the bosses. All I'm going to see is the bosses, but a little more hard. And to be honest, it's a little bit disheartening when you're doing a boss for progression, and you're wiping on it, but you're making good attempts. But in the back of your mind, there's the question of, why am I putting in all this time to wipe on this boss if in LFR we can just one-shot it, I can just get the loot, and like now loot doesn't matter because, in my personal opinion, none of the Hellfire tiers really look amazing. Like, I guess the Warlock looks pretty cool, but none of them are on the level of the mythic gear when this expansion came out. But now it's like, oh, why should I even do that raid? Like, should I spend hours, 2 days a week to raid with a team of people who, it's hard to find now unless you're on a dedicated raiding server, just to wipe on bosses to eventually get to higher difficulties to just see loot that I'm just gonna transmog anyways? Like, what's the overall point? The sad part is there really isn't one, and that's what I'd like to see come back to WoW. And I don't know, with the way that Legion's going, I don't know if it's going to come back. Like, it seems like it's becoming more of a single player game, and that's why I think that, this game really needs a classic or BC server at this point to remind people of why they bought the game in the first place. Like, there's so many full private servers out there, but the only reason I'm not going to those is because I want an official Blizzard server. I want some kind of reassurance that, the server's not going to go down one day and then never come up. So this is Too Tall Tom, and I thank you for watching. Bye.